Hello, everybody. I am Priel Korenfeld, partner with Kopernicana, and I'm joined with Aaron Dignan, founder of The Ready and more recently Supermanage. Aaron is an international point of reference on the issues of organizational design and transformation. He's the author of the bestseller Brave New Work, which has recently been published in Italy in Italian. Same title, Aaron, same title. We couldn't manage to translate that genius wink you gave, and we limit ourselves to translate the subtitles. Are you ready to reinvent your organization? The Italian edition was edited by Iros and curated by myself. Aaron was also, I can say, the co-host of the podcast of the same name for 4 years. Just recently passed the torch to a colleague of The Ready, Sam Sperlin. Aaron Dignan, so happy to have you.
Happy to be here. Excited. Let's talk.
So we are going to talk about the book, but as you surely expected this, we're going to do a check-in question beforehand. So
yes, we must.
For our viewers and listeners that don't know what's a check-in round, it's a way to get everybody engaged and right here, right now, and give some voice, give some airtime to everybody. So we take a question and everybody answers the same questions going round. Going round two people sounds a bit weird, but if you do that with a group, you can take our word for it, it does magic. So my question for today, Aaron, is can we talk about something that surprised you about this book? It was released, I think, in 2019. Was it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, February of 19.
Yeah, February 19. Pre-pandemic, for example. What's something that surprised you about the book since it came out?
I think two things. The thing that was surprising about writing it was realizing how impossible it was to tell a non-linear story, a story that doesn't have a beginning, a middle, and an end, but is a lot more of a web and a circle, trying to do that in order. Like figuring out how do you start the book and how do you end the book. It ended up being impossible at some level. So we just sort of had to do our best, and it has a few parts, but it's not the way we started. I'll tell you that. And in terms of what surprised me after was, of course, the pandemic, because we wrote this book about being ready and being brave and working in different ways and working in ways that were more suited to remoteness and asynchronous behavior. And then suddenly there's this global pandemic and everybody has to jump out of the office and figure out how to operate. And it was like, oh, well, now it feels a lot more relevant. I wish I'd waited a year to put it out.
Yeah, to have everybody understand the need to transform, right? The organization,
yeah.
Everybody. We also had this revelation in Kopernicana, or this occasion, yeah, of the great stress of the pandemic and the great opportunities that it opened in many ways. Kopernicana was founded about when the book came out, shortly before, and so also Kopernicana had a real boost during the pandemic in many ways. Some ways were smaller with working more online, for example, and so on. But other ways were really companies reinventing the way they operated because they simply figured it couldn't be any other way. So that resonates. Personally, I'm gonna say that what surprised me about curating the Italian version of the book was how joyful of a work it was to take care of a creation that was not mine.
Sure.
Yeah, I was really, I was really into it and took great care. And I didn't do the whole translation part, but taking care of the language or specific terms and how they land in Italian organizations. All that was really energizing to me because I had to take care of someone else's baby being born here in a way. It was more like, but it wasn't mine, so I didn't have all the attachments to its success in a way. So that was really surprising to me. I never had that.
That's interesting. I think that's rare because usually when it's translated, I just get a copy in the mail from Taiwan and it's maybe it's good, maybe it's not. I don't know. I don't know who did it. I don't know how much they cared. So it's nice to know who did it and who looked after it. It's a very different feeling than the other translations.
So we in Kopernicana we talk about the Ready as like the big USA sister of Kopernicana in a way, sister company. So I want to start us off with why write this book? Why does work need reinventing? Not only post-pandemic wise and so on. So why this and why you?
Yeah. Well, I think the first question is a lot easier to answer than the second. My experience of work from the moment I entered the workforce has been that work is fundamentally broken. I don't think that's any surprise to you or your colleagues, but the two ways to measure that brokenness are how satisfied are people at work. And I think you don't have to go anywhere to find out how dissatisfied most people are. You go to a restaurant, you go to the airport, you go to an office building, and you just look and you can see the frustration and you can see the ennui and you can see the boredom and the dissatisfaction on people's faces. And that's because of what it has become, right? It used to be a craft, it used to be an art, it used to be just living with the land. It used to have connections that felt more meaningful and more local. It was, passed down from father or mother to son or daughter, or from people in the community. And then suddenly, post-industrial revolution, it's this very mechanized, very robotic, very measured, very efficiency-oriented, machine-like being, and it really sucks the life out of it. So I think that's one criticism, which is sort of the human experience of work. And there are people listening who are like, work isn't bad, I love work, and you're the lucky ones, and good for you.
Sure.
But most people don't feel that way.
No. You can spend just a couple of minutes on TikTok looking how people talk about work, and it's obvious. We're in pain.
So that's the first side, and then the other side is just very practically the institutions that make up our world, whether that be our governments, whether that be our museums, our businesses, our universities, our educational system, they all need to adapt, and we can see it plain as day that they're not built for the world we live in now, that they were not anticipating a world of AI and robots and rockets that land themselves and this kind of economic inequality and globalism, and we are not prepared for what's happening. And so these systems tend to move really slowly, and the world is moving more quickly. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect in terms of business performance and the ability of business to meet our needs as a civilization that I think is also troubling. And so you put those two together and it's like, all right, there's a lot about how we work that could change both and could make us both more adaptive and more human. And that was really the provocation for the book. And as for why me, I mean, I really feel like I kind of tripped into this stuff. I worked in services my whole career, and I started and joined agencies and worked with clients. And eventually I just became very dissatisfied with the experience of being at work myself and tried to find my own way to reinvent it. And then I'm the kind of person that when I find whether it's a toothpaste or a bakery or a car that I love, I won't shut up about it. So as soon as I found new ways of working, I was talking everybody's ear off about it. And the next thing you know, that becomes a company and a book and a podcast and all that. So I have no formal credibility at all. I'm just very passionate.
Passion then brought you to experience. So we can also talk about what happened since then. But the book comes out of, if I get this correctly, also from the experience of working with organizations of different sizes and industries. Very briefly, I'm going to say in the book, it was surprising to me to hear that the writing was non-linear, that you ended up in another way than what you started. I found it really, really logical. From my head, it was really very linear as an explanation. So I can say briefly that there's why work is broken, which is unpacking really deeply and with data what you just said. And then there are a couple of principles of how work should be redesigned. And then there's a whole in a way, it's a tool to help organizations think about that, which you call the OS canvas.
Yeah.
And the last part is around how do we bring about change in a new way, because organizations have been talking about change management since whenever, and it hasn't been delivering so much. So that's what's in the book, very, very briefly.
Sure.
What have you found within that about the book? So principles or the OS canvas that has 12 parts to it. We can go into that if you want, but what have you found that resonates most with readers, with clients, with organizations?
Well, I think that there's a concept in the book that we talk about fairly early in the What's Wrong section, and it's a concept called organizational debt. And that tends to be the first thing that people really connect with, because it's something that they know is there, but they've never really talked about. And so the idea of organizational debt in the book and in the world is that you have all different forms of debt. That could be financial debt, where you pay interest on money that you borrow. That could be technical debt, where you have to refactor or edit your software later to update it to the new standard or to what you're trying to accomplish next. Organizational debt is just all the policies and practices and procedures and beliefs and assumptions that are baked into the organizational cake that we never change, we never update, we never fix. And so that could be the Monday status meeting that everybody hates. It could be the TPS reports that have to be filed 3 times. It could be that you have to ask permission of 4 different people before you take a trip to a client or go to the bathroom. It's, you know, these ways of working that it's just what we do, right? And if you talk to a regular executive and say, talk to me about budgeting, what is it? Why do we do it? When was it invented? There's a little bit of like, budgeting has always existed. We've always budgeted from the beginning of time. And the way we do it is just like, it's somehow platonically ideal, like it's spiritual.
Yeah.
But that's not true. Like, it's less than 100 years old, and it was invented by a guy, and you know, it was promoted to do a certain job, and it's all this stuff was made up essentially. And so the org debt reflects a lot of things that were made up by someone that got to work before you did, that taught you something, and you're just like, oh, that's just what we do. We meet this way, we decide this way, we hire and promote this way, we make these decisions that way, we budget this way, and that's how things will be till the end of time. And what the concept forces people to say is, wait a second, the thing that we do, first of all, do we believe the underlying assumptions and philosophy behind that thing, number one? So if we make people clock in and clock out of a factory, the underlying assumption is that they're not trustworthy to work a full day. Do we believe that? Okay, yes, let's say we do believe that. Now, the second question is, does this actually serve us? Does it get us what we want? Does it get the behavior that we desire?
Yeah.
And often when people ask that question, they start to go, wait a second, I don't know that it does. And so then the question becomes, well, how do we find out? And that's where we get into the experimentation of the book and how to try things to find out what's true. So that's the first concept that hooks them, and then from there we kind of get into some of the other ideas.
Yeah, we call it debt because we pay interest on that thing,
in
right?
frustration and wasted time and wasted energy. Anyone who's ever been to the U.S. Department of Motor Vehicles or a government organization overseas, you know what it looks like when there's a lot of debt. You see a lot of people wasting time and energy on paperwork, on waiting for approval, on trying to get to a real person on the phone. You're just stuck in a loop.
Yeah.
That's
and
all
it's
debt.
just the way it has been, and it's really hard to question. There are some things that are more stable in that way, in the culture, in the system, in like budgeting that you talked about, or the hierarchy of organizations, or the matrix organization, for those. So we found that we find these over and over. Is there any specific part of out of the 12 parts of the OS? I'm not going to name all of them because then we're going to have to go into all of them, and I really hope people are going to read the book. So I'm going to ask, are there any parts of the OS canvas that you found more fertile with working with clients, or recurring? And if there are practices within those that are really basic stuff that you say, okay, we can almost always start doing this, and it will make things at least a little bit better, and then we can move on.
Yeah. The thing I like about the OS Canvas is that you can lay a lot of new ways of working on it without worrying about whose methodology it is. So if you talk about Agile, you can say, all right, daily stand-ups, where does that fit? Oh, it fits in meetings. And Kanban boards, where does that fit? Oh, it fits in workflow. And this role, where does that fit? Oh, that fits in structure. So it has places to hold the things that shape the way we work really nicely. What's interesting is that the most powerful ones are not usually the ones where we start, because they require a deeper commitment. So if I think about changing authority, how we share power and make decisions, that's big. That's really challenging for folks. Or if I talk about, compensation, how we pay people and how we provide for people,
big one.
That's a big one. But we're not going to start there. What's really fun, and we've learned over the years, is that starting with meetings is incredibly powerful, because meetings feel somewhat lightweight. They're frequently occurring. They involve multiple people, and they bring all the other parts of the canvas to bear on this moment. So in a way, a meeting is like an X-ray of the company, because you can see power dynamics, you can see structure, you can see the workflow, you can see work in progress, you can see how different members and different roles play from their position. You can see what information is shared or not shared, and you can sense how it feels. Like you can get a vibe check on the group and how they come together. So we love to engage with meetings early. It doesn't mean we always start there, but it's one of the main base notes for this work is let's change how we meet to talk about strategy. Let's change how we meet to do governance and make policy and make decisions. Let's change how we meet to unblock the work and move forward and think about the tactical operations of the business. Let's change how we meet in terms of what information we need to look at together. And also let's change when we don't meet. So a lot of it is about getting rid of meetings, right? I don't want to have a status meeting. I don't want to have a meeting where everybody's sort of performing for each other, or where we're all kind of there just because the boss wants to make sure that we're at work. And so a lot of the meetings work is actually about elimination. But once you get that microcosm right, if you can have an amazing weekly meeting as a team, all these other things are going to start to change. And so that's where we tend to go.
It looks to me, and from the experience with clients as well, it's a microcosm, like you said. Everything flows or doesn't flow also within those meetings, right? Yeah. And you can see that
and feel it.
Yeah, you can feel that. Sometimes it's in the room, sometimes it's right outside of the room after the meeting, in the corridor, and those conversations and those feelings, talk about org debt. Is this meeting serving us? Could it have been a video, an email, just an
Slack
update?
Message.
That's Slack message, whatever. And that's it. We don't need a meeting to have information. We have so many other ways to handle that now. When we are actually together as a bunch of human beings doing work together, what actually do we need and how to do that? And I also feel that we're really used to meetings, like you said before, the way we've always seen them. So for example, chairing the meeting is also the highest ranking person in the room, which is already a dysfunction, and many other things in that. And there are certain ways in which we do that. We need to have an agenda, or there is never an agenda, and then the manager just calls people out and does that on the fly. But we can see all of that, and we can change that interaction before we need to change anything else. And I find it interesting that people feel the pain. I want to hear if that resonates. People feel the pain, but they simply don't perceive meetings as an object that we can redesign. There is no other way of doing that. Right. And on the other hand, for example, changing structure. People love talking about that, how we need to move stuff around the organization.
The org chart around.
Yeah, right? Does that resonate?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what we're taught, right? So if you look at, the traditional MBA or master's program in business, we're taught about reorgs. We're taught about the org chart. We're taught about how to move people around and how to build a cross-functional organization and a matrix organization. And the problem is the structure, right? We don't have a team focused on that. If we have a quality problem, it's because we don't have a quality center of excellence. And it's like, well, sure. What about a culture of quality? What happened to that? You know, why do we need to have experts for everything? Because all they become is bottlenecks. All they become is nodes in the network that stop everyone else from progress. So that's the first part of it, is we're taught that. And the same thing with meetings. We're taught literally best practice in meetings is have an agenda beforehand. Have everything planned out. We're going to talk about this and then this and then this and then this. We'll figure that out a week before we get there, and then we'll get there and we'll do it. And we immediately have to disabuse people of that idea and say, we don't want an agenda, we want a structure. What's the difference? Well, an agenda is what topics are we going to talk about? And a structure is what are the containers that we're going to have in the meeting? What types of conversations will we have? So saying we're going to have a check-in question to start is a container. It's a structure. Not what the check-in question will be. You can think of that the moment you get there. We're going to have a moment where we meet people's needs through triage. We're going to ask them what they need and get their needs met with people making requests or asking for information or asking for whatever they need. That's a container. It's not actually an agenda until we get there, because if we asked everybody a week before we got there, what do you need? They're going to say, I need X, Y, and Z. And then a week passes and they don't need that stuff anymore. And if they do, your organization is way too slow. So it's sort of, it's learning to build containers instead of those. And that's just one example. In every part of the canvas, there are things where we were taught at this thing. This is what we're supposed to do. And we haven't really been exposed to the alternative. And so when you ask people what to do or what's possible, they're like, well, the best possible thing you can have in a meeting is an agenda a week ahead of time. So I don't know where to go from here. Or if you ask someone, does budgeting suck? And they go, yes, it wastes an enormous amount of time. We go, great. What should we do instead? How many people have read Beyond Budgeting or even heard of the round table, right? So they don't know what their alternatives are. And that's not their fault. That's culture's fault. We don't elevate these things.
I wanted to say that because the book is filled with examples of organizations that have been reinventing this wheel of being an organization for a long time now. These are not, this is not new stuff in the world. There are organizations that have been doing this
50 to 100 years old.
Yeah, decades. People that have been challenging the assumptions of what does it mean and then doing it completely differently with success. So we can learn something, which doesn't mean we can copy that, but we can be inspired by what is different, right? So
the critical thing that people miss when they look at those case studies, and I think this is the thing that's most hilarious to me, is you look at all these people and you start to put them up on a pedestal and say, they're amazing, they reinvented this, or they reinvented that, or they created a culture that does X, Y, and Z. They were all of them beginners. They were all of them people that didn't know the alternative, that weren't necessarily PhDs in business. They were not people that had been trained. They were people that were just like, I don't like the way things are. I'm somehow in charge. I'm going to figure this out as I go, right? The guy that started Patagonia was a literal climber and surfer who didn't know anything about business and was just like, I'm going to go on gut. And 30, 40 years later, you're like, this is one of the most innovative companies in the world. So the permission there to everyone listening is you can get started without any credential, without any approval, without any knowledge, just by following your own common sense.
Amazing. How about change and how you talk about it differently in the book? Does anything in that different loop resonates? And if you can summarize how that is different than the traditional, okay, we're gonna plan the change, then we're gonna execute on that plan, and then everything is gonna be great, right? So how is that different? How did you see that work, or it didn't in a way? So how does that resonate? And
it's the thing that we resist. It's the thing that was resisted the most and that we ran into the most in the early days of both Undercurrent doing this work and the Ready doing this work, which is clients are like, okay, I really want to do this, but give me a plan and let's hit the plan, because they're used to predict and control operations. That's what they've been taught to do, and that's what they've been rewarded for, which makes total sense. But there's a great irony in that when you say, well, what do you want? We want to be agile and free and empowered and dynamic and moving and shaking, and that's what we want to be. Okay, great. Let's do that. How should we get there? by being controlled and predictable and focused on a plan with milestones and KPIs and forcing everyone to do what we say. And it's like, that doesn't jive, right? You can't get from here to there with that behavior, right? And so that incongruity creates the friction that has to happen. So the trick is to trade plans for progress and to pay attention to simple steering metrics, things that we want to care about, and to do it in an experimental way. And so we often talk about this change loop in the book, where we start with a tension or a problem or an opportunity, and then we look at what are alternative ways of solving that problem or handling that opportunity. So if we say we have too many meetings, we say, okay, what are the alternatives? What are some asynchronous ways of working together? Those could come from inside, they could come from outside, and then they could come from your imagination if you're a surfer. And then we go around with the experiment. We say, all right, now let's design a test. And this is another place where the change method really, we talk about change how we change, it really moves away from the norm. The norm is, as you said, with org change and org charts, is let's do a big, radically sized change, but with a very uninteresting thing. So we're just going to move people around on the chart we already have. Well, that's a big thing. It's a radical scale, but it's a non-radical change. It's a change that everyone's going to go, oh yeah, sure. We moved some people around and now we have fewer lawyers or whatever. What we actually want to do is a radical thing at a non-radical scale. So a radical move that is wild, challenging, disruptive, potentially game-changing at a scale that's so small that we can still learn, but if we fail, it won't kill us. It won't matter. And so we say, all right, we're going to change the way we do, compensation, or we're going to change the way we do bonuses, or we're going to change the way we do supply and demand management in our restaurant chain. Where should we do that? And our answer is, what is the smallest possible scale that you can do it at to still learn what matters? So if it is cross-functional or it requires 50 people to find out, then it's 50 people. If it's 500, it's 500, but it's probably 5. It's probably 10. And we always overshoot, because we're in these big businesses where $1 billion is a 1% change. And so nobody rewards 5 people doing anything better. But what we forget is that our job right now is not to get the reward or even to make a difference. It's to prove the point. And so when we prove the point, we say, all right, let's do something that's more unusual. And it should scare you a little bit. Like we're trying something so out there that it feels a little wild. And we're doing it at a scale where if we're wrong, we won't get fired. Yeah. And then you look 4 weeks, 8 weeks later, not 16, not 32, not 4 years. 4 weeks or 8 weeks later, we look and we see, did it work? And if it worked, we do it with 5 times as many teams or 10 times as many teams or everybody, based on our measure of confidence of what happened. And then we keep doing that. So we're working in the business and on the business all the time. It's not something that happens every 2 years when a new EVP gets hired and blows everything up. It's every team, every level, all the time looking for what is the next thing that's in the way of our excellence. How can we innovate our way around that? What can we try at a small scale? And then how do we share, teach, storytell with the rest of the organization and sometimes with the world? What have we figured out? And then what's next? And what's next? And it's just like everything else that matters in the world. It's complex and it's about breathing in and out.
Beautiful. So the Ready as an organization has been doing this for some time. Can you talk to us about
8 years, almost 9.
Yeah. Wow, amazing. So who is the Ready, or what is the Ready? How did this organization evolve? Talk to us about your organization itself.
Yeah, I mean, the Ready started with the idea behind the name, which is we're not, and we need to be. we're not ready. And who's out there that might be interested in becoming more adaptive and more human and more prepared for the kind of future that we want. And we started to gather different thinkers and consultants and practitioners and really a wide range of people to do that work and bring them into really large systems that knew that they had lost their way a little bit in terms of how they work and what it feels like to be there and how to get out of their own way, and started doing these experiments that fed into the book. I mean, the book wasn't written for 4 years of that business's history, really 3 or 4 years. And so we had a chance to work with dozens, if not hundreds of clients in that time and get get a sense for what actually works in practice and what doesn't, and what are the trade-offs, and how hard is this? Really hard. And what does that look like? And so now 8-9 years later, the organization is, I don't know, 35, 40 people, and based in multiple places around the US, North America, Canada, some Europe, and still works with clients ranging from the CDC to Johnson & Johnson to the Federal Reserve to Lockheed Martin. I mean, you name it, any organization that's trying to change the way they operate. Sweet Green we worked with a while ago, Airbnb back in the day. Some of these projects really small, you work with one little group in one little function. Some of them really big, you might work with thousands of people or tens of thousands of people. But in every case, it's one power holder or one group of leaders coming together saying, we want to do things differently, and we're going to invite some partnership and some help in facilitating that. And then you really find out if they want to, because saying you want to and hiring somebody is different than actually wanting to. And when the rubber meets the road and it's time to be quiet or give space or make a risky decision or double down on something when it's not working, because you have to get through that trough of practice. That's what separates the wheat from the chaff. And we
I love it.
see
One interaction came to mind when a very senior leadership member was having me as a facilitator of a meeting. Facilitating means that I control the meeting at that time. I have power only during the meeting, no power at all, between, just to say to our viewers and listeners. And I need to shut that leader down if they're, going on forever and so on. And it happened to me that leaders also, for example, texted me while other people were talking, texting
Amazing.
me. Yeah, and I should be there helping you managing that. So it's hard, and I don't judge that, because I reckon that if you are in a senior leadership position right now, everything you did so far was functional to you arriving there. So you have that in you, right? Even if that's, we called it org debt beforehand, it's hard to give up what you already know how to do. So it's interesting, how to help people. Well, do you really see what we need to change, and do you bring that into yourself? What you actually need to change, and be more quiet if it's needed, and so on. So
one of my favorite techniques that I did not get to do as often as I would like in my coaching work was you give the leader a red card, and you say your job is to prevent other people from talking out of turn or taking up too much air, and it gives them something to do. And it also means that they won't.
Beautiful.
It's pretty good.
I'll do that. Amazing.
I have a special job for you.
You have a lot of power here now. Okay, so you said something about Europe. Do you have any vision or something that you've seen since you started around Europe? Because the book comes out now in Italy. Kopernicana is working mainly or almost completely within national boundaries. But what have you seen around Europe? Many of the cases, for example, are in Europe, but as a space of companies and change, what have you seen?
It's a real mixed bag. I mean, first of all, it's, you look at North America, and technically there are a few countries here, but there's really like a kind of central business identity, I think, that you can operate within, and there's quite a bit of entrepreneurship and capital and energy around doing better. And I think the thing in the US is people want to perform, and they want to be the best, and they want to attract great talent, and they want to keep great talent. And so their motives feel competitive, and they feel market driven for the most part at scale. And in Europe, I think you feel a little bit more collective identity and a little bit more mix of motives that might include what we value and what we cherish as a culture. But the problem is that you have like 20 cultures. And so there isn't really a central identity that the EU is not a thing really. And you can't sell to the EU. You have to do business in Italy, or do business in Germany, or do business in the UK. And I think that has been surprising to me over the years is how much that specialization is required, and how much each country is its own economy with its own price point, its own ambition, its own appetite, and its own style for this work. And you start with different pros and cons. You start with different superpowers and different weaknesses with each culture in terms of how they do business and what they naturally do. If they're naturally very inclusive, great, you don't have to worry about that as much. If they're naturally very slow and pensive and thoughtful, then you have to deal with that. And so it's been an education for me, for sure. And I'm far from an expert.
I also saw, give an example, a lived example. We talked about meetings, and you can talk about tactical meetings or active meetings and action meetings. And for example, I learned that Italian entrepreneurs and managers tend to talk more than other managers in other countries. Not because they want more airspace, but because the way Italians use language is different. And it's a culture thing. The Italians talk with more nuance, with more context. If you shut those people up after 10 seconds or 30 seconds, then from when they started, they're gonna feel that as violating their space, right? Yeah. It's not in the and we need to adjust for those differences. If you work, and we do work, for example, in companies, multicultural companies, you have to talk about that as well. If you work with Chinese, Japanese, American, French, German, and Italian people in the same room, it's completely different. Yeah, it's completely different, and you need to start looking at that. So that completely resonates. So to wrap us up, what brave new frontiers for brave new work? So I'm curious. The book was out 2019. Now it's recently out in Italy as well, and people can get a hold of that. And we're bringing this work in Italy. But where is this kind of work going next in your idea? And then where are you going next?
When I think about what's next for the work, I think it's about getting real and getting closer to the ground in terms of what actually is effective in the field. I think the first 10 years of this most recent resurgence of ideas in new ways of working and the future of work has been very optimistic and very idealistic. I'm guilty as charged myself in terms of painting a picture of what could be. But I think we're learning in the work on the ground that it's hard to make changes in ways that can stick. And so I think the way, and when I say stick, I mean for 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. What we see is the risk of sandcastle building is what I've said in the past, where you build this elaborate thing, you get a team or a function or a whole small business working in a certain way, and 2 years passes, 5 years passes, something changes, a leader changes, ownership changes, and the whole thing gets washed out to sea. And that's why we don't see this industry, I think, growing as fast as we might hope. We don't see an exponential growth in these practices. We see a kind of a small, slow incline. And so I think a lot of the work now needs to turn to new ways of implementing and new ways of cementing these practices. Some of that is legal and structural, like long-term stock exchange or benefit corporations or trusts, things like that. But a lot of it is just in how we teach and deploy the work as well, thinking about how to go from A to B to C to D and do so in a way that keeps deepening the practice. And I don't know exactly how that's going to be done, but the team at the Ready does. And I think Rodney and the Source Circle there have been pushing the work forward for the past couple of years, as I myself have begun to focus on what's next for me, which is about software and really learning about how to build software that works, which is hard enough, but how to incorporate some of these ideas and values into the world of software, because that's where a lot of our unquestioned assumptions and kind of opinions of the software shape how we work together. And so I'm very interested in that long lever as something that might be next for me.
Amazing. So we talked about the book. We've seen what's in there, and we gave a hint. Thank you so much for your time, for your experience, for this work. It was personally for me one of the books that came down from the theoretical and also very enthusiastic dream world of what could be different and how could it be different. I actually found it very, very practical, and I know that yes, to do that we need to start where organizations are right now. So that's the first part of doing this work, is listening really hard. Where are we now? And this is the work we're doing with clients as well. So really grateful. Thank you, Aaron, for this time, and I'll see you around.
Awesome. Thanks so much.